Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got Experiencer Mike Stevens on board and book author Nomar Slevik. Mike Stevens is the founder of Granite Sky and is a New Hampshire native born and bred. While not helping others with their experiences, you can often find him in the forests and mountains of the state, camping and hiking. Mike hopes to combine his simple New England values with his own experiences to give people a positive new outlook on the phenomena. Mike is a seasoned paranormal researcher and investigator. He has worked to change the stigma surrounding the abduction phenomena by promoting public awareness of the subject and by encouraging and supporting other experiencers. He was the initiating force behind the New Hampshire historical marker for Betty and Barney Hill's UFO encounter. Mike has been interviewed in the past by newspapers, television, and radio about his involvement in the paranormal and UFO communities, locally as well as internationally. Mike has been a trusted source for New Hampshire's UFO history. Mike's experiences started around the age of 3 and have been ongoing ever since. The experiences have come in a variety of forms and demeanor. Dealing with his own experiences has led to help others overcome their trauma as well as his own. Nomar Slevik is an independent creator and researcher in the numerous aspects of the paranormal. He delights in sharing stories through different mediums such as books, documentaries, and podcasts. He has shared his works with hundreds of thousands of enthusiasts and has maintained a steady output of material for over 20 years. Slevik has been fascinated by all things paranormal since childhood, beginning with a UFO encounter at 4 years old. Now 42, his life's passion has been to research, investigate, write, and share UFO and extraterrestrial encounters from everyday people in a way that conveys the human element of profoundly strange encounters. His latest book is called Granite Skies, A Disconcerted Journey Through the Unknown, and can be purchased on Amazon. So, gentlemen, thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us, Ian.
So, your book came out when, Nomar?
It came out last month in August.
Okay. So, how did that book coming to be? So, I read a bit of it. Now, I know that the book is a good part of it is related to Mike's own experiences. But could you get into a quick explanation of what's the book about?
Sure. The book really is a biography of Mike Stevens and his extraterrestrial encounters. But running parallel with Mike's story is the story of New Hampshire's lore with extraterrestrial activity, along with my own inner dialogue about hearing Mike's story and just how jaw-dropping it is. And it also gets into mental health and overcoming trauma, really.
So Betty and Barney Hill, I think they were coming down from Canada or from Montreal, and they were driving through New Hampshire. That's where the encounter happened.
Yeah, that's right. And they too had an extraordinary encounter, but theirs, kind of like Mike's, took a while to come out. It's not like they had this experience and then the next week everybody in the United States knew about it. It was a long process for them to come out and for all of their stuff to be fully realized, which was helped along by the hypnosis process, which Mike has actually experienced as well, and helped him remember some experiences from his childhood.
So did the idea of creating the book happen before meeting Mike? Like, did you know about him before that, or did the book happen after meeting him?
It definitely happened after meeting him. Mike and I became acquainted with each other by my involvement with the KRI Center of Consciousness Studies down in New Hampshire. And that center held a lot of different meetings. Some of them had to do with help groups in dealing with alien abduction, and then a lot of other types of groups with empaths and things like that. But they would also sometimes bring in speakers on the weekends, and I started doing a few presentations down there, and Mike and I became acquaintances, and slowly, as it just happens in adulthood, you find yourself becoming friends. And we weren't the closest of friends, we weren't best friends or anything, but I had heard that he had some experiences himself. I remember, I think it might have been my first presentation down there, Mike showed me this really interesting picture of a light beam that was taken at a cabin in New Hampshire. And it's really interesting. I'm sure you're showing it right now because I emailed it to you. So I slowly started finding out bits and pieces of Mike's extraterrestrial history. And then I would say it was probably about 2 years ago now, Mike and I had a long conversation on the phone. And after him telling me firsthand a lot of his experiences, I was convinced that his story needed to be told, and we came up with the idea of me writing a book about his encounters. But it was kind of like a long time in the making. I was also, like, when we talked about that, I was right in the throes of a few other projects. I had a previous book that had just come out, and then my focus was slowly shifting away to a documentary that I wanted to work on. That turned into another documentary, and then finally, like towards the end of 2019, is when I started kind of ramping up to begin telling Mike's story. And then that involved him and I meeting a couple of times so I could get the full breadth of his story, because it's long and it's complicated and there's a lot of moving parts. And even though we had 2 long form interviews, when I say long form, like we talked for like 3 or 4 hours and it was kind of intense for him. There's a lot of reliving of stuff that he had to deal with. And even though we had these 2 long form interviews where I recorded everything, I had immediate access to all of the information, I still found myself having to message him or call him or whatever to ask more questions or to get clarifying answers. Sometimes during our phone conversations or something, he would be like, oh yeah, this also happened, so there was just all this information. And I slowly began kind of piecing it all together.
Yeah. Well, speaking of friends, Mike and I are personal friends. We met in 2015 for the first time. So yeah, you're like when we did the the Japanese TV show.
Yep.
Yeah, you were the first of the Starborn group to show up, and well, I was the first, but I was waiting on everyone, and you were there, and we haven't met, and like we realized we were there for the same show, and that's when everything started. So that was pretty cool. So Mike, at what age did your experiences start?
The first time I remember, I was about 3.5, 4. But years later, I was probably about 25. There was a gap in that first memory, and I did a regression to kind of see if I could fill in some of the blanks of that gap. And between what kind of came out in that regression and then just some stories I had been told about growing up, it almost seems like there's a really good possibility that it started as an infant.
Yeah, well, strange that you're talking about the ages of 3 and 25. My experiences, I tell my folks that there were people in my bedroom at night, but this was around the age of 3 because I'm 4 years older than my brother, but my brother wasn't born when it happened. So again, that's the age of 3. And then when I started school, everything stopped. But as soon as I finished college with my second degree and I was on my own for the first time, that's when everything started to kick in. So you're not being influenced by school, you're on your own, and I guess you're more open to receive stuff. So after the age of 25, you started remembering stuff, or did something?
Yeah, it was around that age that I started really trying to understand and go through the process of like self-acceptance that this was really happening, because it was there, you remembered it and all this stuff, but you didn't really want to admit it was happening. That was kind of the time I was trying to like evaluate the whole thing. I just had the regression, and it was kind of all in my face again, like I had to deal with it. And I wasn't dealing with it well. I really thought, you know, I was losing my mind. Not this couldn't be real and this stuff. And until I started working on it and, you know, through it and talking to other people and and stuff kept happening. And it was like, oh, this is real.
So you had regression done to confirm something or to find more about something?
I had to see. So the first time what happened, when I was about 3.5, we're at my grandmother's house and there was some type of family function going on because like all the extended family was there, aunts, uncles, and that sort of thing. And the way my grandmother's house was set up, you know, like you came in through the kitchen and then there was a dining room that was kind of like central that you could get to the living room, the bathroom, and all the other rooms in the house. And off of that dining room in the back, there was like a 3-season porch that overlooked the backyard. As soon as I walked through the dining room, like past that opening to the backyard, there was this immense calling to like get outside immediately. And I don't remember going outside, but I remember standing in the driveway and my cousin was out there with me. And she's only like 6 months older than I am. So, you know, we would have been like 3.5, 4. And the chances of one of us getting outside unnoticed, you know, probably wouldn't have happened. The fact that both of us did is just astronomical and a miracle in itself. But so anyways, we find ourselves standing in the driveway and the woods behind my grandmother's house start glowing red. Slowly this saucer-shaped object emerges above the tree line and floats across the lawn and parks itself next to this big tree that used to be at the end of the driveway. And it was, you know, that typical saucer shape, kind of domed at the top, domed at the bottom. And it was, you know, best guess, like 40 feet wide, 20 feet high. And there was this row of lights around it that was, they kind of like rolled and they didn't seem like individual bulbs. It was kind of more like a fluid, like color change around it. And it was like soft lights, white. And all of a sudden that band of lights started getting more intense, more reds and oranges. And when that happened, an interior light came on in this thing, like when you open your car door at night. And when that happened, it revealed like a row of windows above that center bar of lights. When that light came on, interior light came on, we could make out like shoulders and head, like silhouettes, but no real details. And we just had this really immense just feeling of being stared at. Then there was a blank in my memory. I don't know what happened next. The next thing I remember, this craft is at the opposite end of the driveway by the street above a telephone pole. It kind of sat there for a minute and shot off into space. And that was my first memory. That was a standing memory. So the hypnosis was to try to look at that piece in the middle.
Did you ever contact your cousin regarding the incident?
Yeah, we kind of grew up with this surface conversation of, do you remember the UFO we saw? Yes, and that was it. We never really talked about it though. So it was right about that time frame of 25. I just had the regression, and I said, well, I better call her and see what she remembers. So I told her to tell me what she remembered, and then I'd tell her. And she started telling me, and I had forgotten about it until she started telling me. We were at my grandmother's house again. I think we were about 8 or 9 at this point. But she thinks we were younger. But at any rate, we're on my grandmother's porch looking out at the neighbor's backyard. And this red light came into the sky. And it was like making figure eights and, you know, circles. It was really like dancing. There's no way it was a plane or anything conventional. You know, drones were unheard of at this point. And that was what she remembered as the first time. So then I had to tell her what I remembered, and she didn't remember any of that. But we have some discrepancies on the age of when stuff happened. So.
Okay. So Nomar, I think you saw a UFO when you were a kid, I believe. Oh, at what age did you see that?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was right around the same age as you guys. I was sleeping in my bed. I lived in northern Maine at the time, right on the Canadian border. I actually used to get my haircuts in Canada. And I'd gone to sleep, and a loud clap of thunder woke me up. And so my eyes are kind of like darting around trying to figure out what's going on, and I can hear rain hitting the window. And then after a while I could see my window lighting up, and I was like, oh, a thunder and lightning storm. So like I sat up and on my bed and looked out the window, and I'm seeing, lightning strikes, and I'm hearing thunder. And then all of a sudden there was this really thick lightning bolt that got stuck in a cloud. And that's at least how my young mind remembers it. And like if I were to ask you to draw a lightning bolt, you draw this thick, jagged yellow line. And that's what I remember seeing. And it was stuck in a cloud, and there was electricity coming off of it. And I was hearing all these booms. Then I don't really know what happened next. I just kind of fell asleep. I woke up the next morning, went to the bathroom, and when I was walking from the bathroom back to my room, I could see out my bedroom window, and the lightning bolt was still there in the clouds. So I went downstairs. I got my dad, brought him upstairs to show him, and it was gone. So I guess like I was pretty adamant. Like I'm like, no, like there was a lightning bolt stuck in the sky. It was really weird, and he was just doing the adult thing, like, yeah, whatever. And but I was really adamant and insistent. So it got to the point where he had to kind of like kneel down and put his hands on my shoulders and was like, listen, it didn't rain last night. Like there was no storm. Like you're fine. Everything's fine. I was like, okay. So a couple of weeks later, my parents had woken my sister and I up because the northern lights were revealing themselves, and they wanted us to go see them. So this was the middle of the night, kind of like what happened 2 weeks prior. And my dad's holding me in his arms, and I'm looking up at the northern lights. It's the only time I ever saw them, but I still remember it, just like I still remember that lightning bolt. So what those two incidents did at a really young age was to teach me that weird stuff happens in the sky and I should probably look up. And that was just the catalyst of a lifelong passion of the unknown. Of course, everybody knows now what the Northern Lights are, but at 4 years old or 3 years old, the Northern Lights and a lightning bolt stuck in the sky was kind of like the same thing to me, And it wasn't until I got older, I was like in my early teens when I started remembering that lightning bolt, and I was like, oh man, I wonder if that was like the first time I ever saw a UFO. And since then, since that first sighting, I've seen 11 UFOs in my lifetime. And when I say UFO, I don't mean extraterrestrial spacecraft. I just simply mean the definition of unidentified flying object. So I don't know what they are. There are, of those 11, there's 3 or 4 where I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's an extraterrestrial space ship of some sort. But the other stuff could have been anything. If you ever see a low-flying helicopter with its front headlight on and it's like coming into, for a landing or something, and it's heading right towards you, it looks like a floating light in the sky until it finally banks or something, or you can start to hear it, I've seen a bunch of those in my lifetime. I used to live near an airport, and I was like, oh man, it's just but for a second though, it was a UFO.
Okay. Oh, that's decent. That's pretty cool. Especially, having that lightning bolt stuck in midair for no reason. That's crazy. That's the first
It was
time
weird. And the electricity coming off of it and hearing booms. And it was interesting when I was working on my book that came out in 2018, Otherworldly Encounters. I found a few different stories, specifically from Maine, of other witnesses hearing booms associated with balls of light seen in the sky. Not necessarily like, UFO shaped or what Mike described earlier, but it was cool to know that other people in the state that I had my encounter were also seeing something weird in the sky and hearing booms associated with it.
I wonder why UFOs or ETs, especially UFOs, they tend to show themselves to people. There's a reason for that. When I called it my UFOs, everybody was outside, but nobody saw it. But those that wanted to see it were doing the C5. So sometimes I wonder if we were getting information downloads that might, appear.
That's interesting. I tried my own homemade, if you will, CE5 thing. I'm not the biggest believer in it. I have some issues with Greer, but regardless, I actually saw this really great documentary called Calling Occupants. It's by a guy named Mitch Fillion. and you can actually watch it free on YouTube. It's really good. But towards the end of the documentary, him and some buddies who aren't really sure if they believe in UFOs decide to do like a CE5 thing, and they ended up catching a light in the sky, and they show it on camera. But that's all it is. It's just a light in the sky.
Yeah.
So I was on my own investigation when I was researching my previous book, and nothing was happening. It had been like 4 hours. It's like 2 a.m. I'm on the top of this mountain where supposedly activity happened. And honestly, I was just getting bored. And I'm like, okay, screw it. I'm going to try some CE5 stuff. So I just started repeating things in my head, like, please reveal yourself to me. It's, I'm open to this. Like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I'm doing that and I'm doing that. I probably do it for like 5 minutes or something. My eyes are closed. I open them and I'm looking around, and there's nothing. I'm like, dang. So I get back in my car and I'm just kind of like situating myself, and something out of the corner of my eye caught my attention. So I look over, and there's a body of water behind me, but a mountain in front of me. And when I look over the body of water, there's a light in the sky. Up to the left was the actual moon. So this was a separate light that was actually hovering over the body of water. It wasn't moving. There was no blinking lights. I didn't hear any sound. And I'm just in awe, like, oh my God, did the CE5 thing work? Like, what's happening right now? So I grab my camera and I start recording it. And I probably only recorded it for like 20 seconds or something. Then this car like showed up. And when a car shows up like on the top of a mountain, like at 2 a.m, like you don't just kind of keep doing what you're doing. I was like, who's this person? Like, am I going to get murdered now? So I kind of like stopped what I was doing for a second. Anyways, once that calmed down and I went to look again, it was gone.
Oh.
But I was happy that I grabbed it.
Oh, cool. So Mike, so coming back to your the regression, so what did you learn from that?
There's still some blanks. It wasn't like a full, I didn't have full memory. It didn't paint this picture of exactly what happened, but I did find myself in the craft. And there was a lot of fear. I had more of the feeling of stuff around me, but I couldn't really see them. But that's when I kind of figured out, like, this had happened before, and that they weren't this wasn't a chance encounter. They were there specifically for me, and most likely my cousin as well. And I think the biggest thing that came out of it was that, like, this was intentional. And it was weird because I didn't have as much fear once I was in the craft, but dealing with some things, but dealing with other things, I really did. And what happened was I ended up snapping myself out of the regression when I figured out that they were like they were trying to distract me at the moment, and they were working on my cousin. And that's when it became too much to handle, like, emotionally for me, and I snapped out of it. But
Wow. So I'm wondering if, the reason why you were outside with your cousin was, they actually brought you out, especially for that.
Yeah, I believe they called us out, however it works. I mean, to me, it's the only reason that explains, one, why we would have gone outside, two, how we got outside without anybody noticing us, or that sort of thing. I think they kind of did that thing where they shut off all the adults or whatever.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the reason why, when I was dating Sarah at the time, and we did, when he called in, the first craft that came just above the power lines, maybe 20 feet, 30 feet above the power lines. Everybody was outside. Kids were outside playing. This was August, mid-August. It was somewhat warm outside, and this happened around 9:45. So the sun was somewhat still up. So it wasn't like totally dark. But again, everybody should have seen it, but nobody saw it. Again, it shows itself to whom they want. So
yeah, well, it was a few years ago we did this C5, and we got, I can't even call it an object, but it was this just ball of light that came into the sky and kind of got lower to us and then passed by. And one of the other guys who was there, he was quick on it. He was like, I'm going to count to three. When I count to three, everybody yell out what color they saw. And the weird thing is everybody saw like a different color. So it's like it showed itself to different people in different ways. So it kind of feeds back onto what you're saying. It like shows itself to who it's trying to.
So what color was yours?
I saw it as orange, but other people saw it as white. Other people saw it as red.
See, mine, I mean, both of mine, which were like 7 days apart, because I called in the same ship 7 days later when I went back to my folks. I called it lollipop orange. That kind of orange. So it's not orange red, but somewhat similar. So interesting. So mine was just like it wasn't perfectly round, but it looked like a watermelon, but less elongated, but more like an egg, but less elongated. But so what was yours? Perfectly round?
No, not quite as much as an egg, but not a perfect circle either.
Yeah, so it seems like the same thing. So did anything happen after that, experience-wise?
Not that anybody remembers. It was a mixed group. There were people who were there who definitely believed, were really into it, and there were people who were like, "Well, we'll see what happens." I'm just, didn't really believe, and so I think they're like, "All right, that's all you're getting," type thing.
So regarding your experiences after that, did you have any other supernatural stuff happen? Other visitations, perhaps?
Yeah. So we ended up actually moving into the house next to my grandmother's, which is, the yard we saw the red light in the sky in. And when I was living there, it was like third grade-ish. I was getting reoccurring visits. What would happen is these balls of light, little like baseball size balls of light would come in through the window. And once they got into the room, they would kind of form into these humanoid shadows, but they're more than just shadows. They almost had like smoke or movement within the shadow. I don't know if that's how they really looked or if my mind was blocking it out, so I didn't get scared. But energetically, they had, you could tell what they were. There were two males, and they would usually stand right at the bedside, and they were like kind of strict, almost militaristic, but not like in a mean or aggressive way, but in a he needs to learn his lessons. Like I was supposed to learn something. The third one seemed like a female and very, very much motherly, and she would like almost pace in the corner like impatiently, like she wanted to play or touch or hold or whatever, and the other two were like, no, he needs to learn. And on one occasion, this went on for about 9 months, like maybe not every day, but more than once a week. And on one occasion, they brought what seemed like a small male, like a child, and he was sitting on the floor, and they let me get off the bed and sit with him. And the first thing I asked him was, "What are you?" And all of a sudden, this image of Rosie the robot from the Jetsons like beams into my head, and he starts laughing, like not physically, but you just like, I got hit with a wave of laughter from him. Then the last time I had any encounters with them, I was being held, and all I could see was like this white cloth, and I saw blood on it, and I kind of pulled my head back and realized that the blood was coming from my nose, and the cloth was a gown that this female being was wearing. And I was kind of turned my head, and I could look down at the back 2 rickety steps that went into our washing room, and then my bedroom was off it. So I don't remember how we got into the house, but when we got into the house, like I said, they were always in control before. They were very panicky this time. Like before, they always knew what the next step was. They were, always ahead of the game. And this time they seemed really panicky. Like they messed up, like they did something they weren't supposed to. And my yeah, interpretation of it is that there was maybe more of an abduction type scenario going on with maybe another group or something, and they stepped in and interceded, and they weren't supposed to. And that was the last time I saw them. And the only other thing that happened with them I forgot to say was one time the female approached the bed with this like little black box, and she opened it up, and inside it there was what looked like an arrowhead, but it was like made out of glass or crystal or something. And she said, "This is the key." And I don't remember, what that meant, if it was a physical key or if that was symbolic, or what that meant. But yeah, so that was like the next set of experiences.
So how well do you know? I know you had trouble, I think, identifying them. At first they were shadows, but could you actually see them? Do you know
Oh yeah, on
how
that
they look
last
like?
time, they kind of had that typical gray archetype, except, with the big black eyes. They were a little bit like smoother in complexion. They weren't like as pitted. They were almost more porcelainly, and they were that white color. She was maybe, I don't know, 4 foot, and they might have been, a foot taller, half a, foot taller. But yeah, in the, we're like a typical alien head, or what we think of, the kind of comes down to that point. It did, but not as pronounced. It was kind of more rounded, just really softer features than like what we think of when we say a gray.
Were they wearing anything?
I think they were wearing almost like a black one piece. I didn't see, like the difference between a shirt or pants. I don't remember shoes or feet or anything like that. I mean, she had the white gown on.
So that's how you were able to differentiate between, both genders? Or did you feel it energetic wise?
Energetic, you could tell they were the same as before. The only difference was I could see them this time.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was because they were in that panicky state, or if that was just because I knew that it wasn't scary anymore because they just saved me from something else. I mean, it's a lot of conjecture. I'll never know, but.
So regarding your bloody nose, what did they put something up it? Did you?
I don't remember. I don't have any recall of what happened or why, and I've never gone back for regression to find out or anything.
Ever thought of, getting a scan from a slug machine for, try to find implants?
No, I haven't. I mean, I know I have something in my leg, but I've always been so rough and tumble. For all I know, it could be a piece of glass, could be a rock, or if I have to go in for something and get a scan on my leg, yeah, I'm definitely gonna be like, hey, can you see what that is? But
yeah. Because normally, if it was a foreign object, you'd get a reaction from the body to try to reject it.
Right.
But if it's an implant, they know their stuff. It could stay inside for the rest of your life. So
yeah.
So Nomar, to talk about your book a bit. Now you were talking about other stories, other experiences that happened in New Hampshire. Could you get into that a bit? Just to give a sort of quick teaser to the public.
Yeah, sure. So obviously the most in-depth and I think the longest story in that section of the book is the Betty and Barney Hill encounter. There's been a few different books already written about Betty and Barney Hill, and there was a TV movie back in the day, which is really good and free on YouTube right now. And there's been a couple of like web series, and now it turns out that it's looking like they're going to do a new series involving Betty and Barney Hill, which is kind of cool. So I tell a concise but fairly brief story about Betty and Barney Hill, but essentially back in '61, they saw something in the sky. They weren't really quite sure what to make of it. It got to the point where they pulled over to get a better look at it. And really from that moment on, like all hell broke loose. Like Barney saw some crazy stuff when he looked at whatever this object was in the sky through binoculars. So he and Betty decided to hightail it, and the thing ended up like catching up with them, and then all hell broke loose where there was an abduction, but there was also like this little standoff that happened in the road where there was this craft just hovering just over the road, I believe, and there were a bunch of military looking like beings standing outside, and it was all very seemed aggressive, and Barney was terrified the entire time and kept his eyes closed for most of his encounter. Whereas Betty, while terrified during the encounter, she remembered a lot more. And then she had this really different experience towards the end of it, where she ended up meeting and talking to this leader of who was on the of the craft or whatever, and was able to ask some questions, and she eventually convinced it to give her something so people would believe, people in their lives would believe that this had happened to them. And so he actually ended up giving her a book. But just before they were about to leave, he asked for the book back because his colleagues kind of got pissed off. They were like, "No, you can't give her that book." So she reluctantly kind of like had to give it up. But she did remember seeing this like holographic star map that the leader showed her, and explained some things on the map, like where they were and what the solid lines meant and what these dotted lines meant. And years later, she told this other person about it who studied things of that nature. I don't remember even the name or the title, frankly, but before this cluster of stars was fully discovered, this person took one of Betty's rough drawings of this supposed star map and was able to coincide a lot of the stars as accurate to her map, which is really interesting and telling. But a few other encounters. There was this whole other thing that happened in New Hampshire where these bunch of kids were sledding and they ended up seeing a UFO, and then an investigation took place, and I'm trying to remember. I guess I don't remember fully that one, but some other things that I get into are some more recent encounters that happened in New Hampshire from like 2014 to like present day. And it's mostly just like a lot of lights in the skies and stuff, but there are a lot of photographic evidence where I give people information in the book to look it up for themselves, online, so they can see the pictures and everything. And of course, there's the incident at Exeter that happened in New Hampshire as well, which is almost as famous as the Betty and Barney Hill. And I actually end up telling that story in the introduction of the book, because it was kind of like my introduction to like New Hampshire in general. I actually heard about the Exeter encounter before I heard about Betty and Barney Hill, just like in my ufology upbringing, if you will. Which is kind of interesting, but that's just the luck of the draw with whatever your local bookstore has or what your local library has. They had the incident at Exeter story. They didn't have the interrupted journey, so for whatever reason. So, but those are some of the really brief New Hampshire stories that are in the book.
Cool. Do you know if I know they talked about this? There's a sort of Devil's Triangle regarding UFO incidents in Maine. So I'm wondering if New Hampshire's within that UFO triangle.
I mean, it's certainly possible, and I think that has been speculated on. But what I found, I found like this my own sort of triangle that I coined in one of my previous books. But really, if you get like a square mile radius of really any part of the United States, and then you do some research about the little towns in whatever square mile that you do, you're going to find some weird stuff and weird triangles all over the place. So I don't know if these triangles in these areas are really a thing, or there's just so many reports that you can make a triangle out of so many different areas. I'm not really sure how that works. However, the Bridgewater Triangle, which is in New England, is a really, really interesting place. Obviously, there's the Bermuda Triangle where all these really weird things happen. But the use of the term triangle again has kind of become synonymous with something paranormal or something otherworldly, but it's really just a way to describe a section of area or land or sea or something like that, especially in regards to the Bermuda Triangle. So if you're just talking about areas of high paranormal activity, I think they're scattered throughout the entire world, and I don't think you need a triangle or anything to have something happen. You might be in an area that's right outside of a triangle, and some weird stuff is going to happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you know that there are a few, like there are Google type maps out there and showing exactly where UFO sightings were taken or
Yeah.
happened, and I thought, and I started clicking, and and zooming in into to my hometown, and then I was realizing, oh, there's a lot more UFOs in my vicinity than I thought. So it's not
Sure.
really just me, but mine was an orb or like an orb ship, but actual saucers were seen and a triangle too. So I thought that was amazing because I
Yeah.
might have seen a triangle once, but I thought it might have been a TR3B because I was doing a C5 with somebody that worked with Bud Hopkins and
Nice.
a police officer, a MUFON researcher, a possible hybrid, my ex abductee with who had military family, and at 11:11 at night, the house we were doing the C5 at was on a hill, so we had a pretty good decent view of the of the skies, and at the horizon, super far away, we were seeing a light coming directly toward us. And from that point that we saw it up until it was above us, that might have taken a minute just to get in. That's faster than the plane. And as soon as it was above us, we were hearing afterburners. But what we saw were three white lights in triangle formation, and at the center was a huge red light.
Interesting. Now, in Freeport, Maine, which is located in southern Maine, I had my own kind of triangle-like sighting, and it was actually hovering over a house, and it was probably 3 football fields away from me,
Sweet.
and it was hovering over this house, but it had 2 red lights and a really big white one in the middle of it, which is just kind of interesting. How like, is that a perception thing, or was that the reason I needed to see it? And did I see more red, because maybe I have a negative connotation to it or something? I mean, you can get into all sort of philosophical talks about it, but it's interesting how your light was, really, the big one was white.
Well, when you go on the internet and you search for triangle UFOs or TR3Bs, that's what you get normally, is that big, huge red light in the center with, on and small lights on each corners. So
Right.
yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's definitely.
So Mike, a lot of experiencers tend to have supernatural stuff happen around them. You growing up, did you ever get that feeling, or did you experience anything that's out of the ordinary?
Yeah, I think the biggest one, like growing up, was when my grandfather passed. We had all gone down to New Jersey for the funeral and stuff, and there were a lot of weird things, like with the funeral itself. Like, we're in the cemetery, and they were going to lower the casket, and they had to stop because somehow a skunk had gotten into the hole.
No.
And so the funeral directors and stuff are beside themselves. So, like, we have no idea how this has happened. This has never happened. And the family all has tears running down its face. So they think we're like heartbroken over this. And we're all dying laughing. It's to the point of tears because this is such my grandfather's like sense of humor. So we get through that. They clear it up, and we do the funeral thing, and we're spending the night. My immediate family is all in the living room. Me, my brother, my mother, and my father. The night after the wake, and this bright orange ball of light comes into the window, kind of comes to everybody in the family, and then makes its way to the chimney and goes up and disappeared. So that was kind of like my first like big major thing. I mean, since then I've seen, you know, full-bodied spirit, shadow people. You know, I've had a bunch of weird stuff.
So at what age did the orb appear to you? No.
I think I was right about 12 at that point.
So about the shadow people, did anything happen to you during that event, or was it just were they just moving around?
They were just moving around. That was more of like an investigation type thing than like something that just like happened to me.
Okay. Strange. My dad. Now I'm not sure if he was like a child experiencer, but he's a very down to earth type of fellow. So he's not into UFOs, but as soon as I made him see the UFO, that the second I called in, he started to have stuff happen, and sometimes he was being felt up at night. He'd wake up and there was a shadow being right beside his bed. But again, his grandmother died not too long before that. His mother died not too long before that. So it could have been her. He had also a golden orb come into the bedroom. He had the flu, really bad cold. He was sleeping in the basement because he didn't want to wake up my mom. But he woke up, and as soon as he woke up, that through the basement window, it came in, 4-inch orb, golden, and it flew from one side of the bed to one side of the bedroom to the other, and it went poof, right out. So again, and I think it could have been his mother also. So because your grandfather, it happened not too long after your grandfather passed away. So, but the timing's pretty good.
Yeah, and I mean, we grew up in one of these households. Like my grandfather's house was haunted before that. Like my mother and all my aunts, everybody was like, "Oh, you heard the footsteps." They believe it was his mother who used to rent the apartment upstairs. So we grew up in this. We could talk about ghosts, this and that. Nobody mentioned UFOs at all. And then when I started like doing this stuff and like in earnest a little bit, that's when all the stories started coming out from the family. Like, almost everybody in the family's at least seen a UFO. My great uncle was kicked out of a private school for claiming he was abducted by aliens. And I'm like, I grew up my whole life like thinking I was alone, and nobody ever said any of this. It was,
Yeah, same with me. There's a whole bunch of ghost stories within the family. So I was brought up with this supernatural thing going on, but I wasn't really afraid because it was normal. But so each time an event happened to me, like when my brother's vision, when I had a vision of him dying or drowning, and found out later that he almost died because of medication, a whole bunch of stuff like that. But I tell my mom about this, and she said, well, keep it to yourself, because some people might think I'm crazy. But then I'm hearing all these. I guess the best thing coming out was because I was able to meet you guys, and now I'm hearing that this is totally normal to a certain few. So that was really comforting. And I thought it was a bit crazy, and I felt lonely because of that. But coming out was the best ever, and going down to the States for the first time, meeting you guys was pretty cool, and so I'm really happy for that. And okay, so you had your regression done. You had other stuff happen. Did you have other events regarding ETs after the the visitation with a female and the other males?
Yeah, I mean, everything's been constant right up to a couple weeks ago.
Really?
I didn't really see anything in the sky then. I was out camping. It was one of those really hot days, high humidity. I was in the shade. I'd been there for like 6 hours. I had a fire going. I was set up for the day. Like I wasn't going anywhere. And then for whatever reason, I don't know if it was a calling or what, I get this crazy idea that, oh, I'm going to go hike the mountain that's right there. So I pack up camp, put the fire out. I go up to the mountain and make this quick little short, Facebook video, like, oh, I did it. I'm sweating to death. Like I'm too old for this stuff. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes. I'm going to lay, stretch my back out and just lay on this rock for a little bit. And, my intention was to lay there for like 5 minutes. When I opened my eyes, I could see the sky was visibly dark. So I'm like, what's going on? I pull out my phone and I'm like, 2 hours had gone by. And I'm like, how the hell did I sleep on that jagged rock for 2 hours, one without, you know, rolling off the mountain or just even that uncomfortable, you know?
Yeah.
But so at this point, I'm like, all right, I got to start getting a hammock set up because it's getting dark. And I'm running around trying to find the right group of trees to, you know, make this happen. And I look over and I notice there's a flashing coming from my flashlight. I mean, from my backpack, and it's my headlamp. But my headlamp doesn't have a strobe feature. You have to like click through all 4 modes. It's one of those, you really got to press it. You can't bump it on by accident. So I pull out my phone and I take like a quick 12-second video of it just because I was going to use it later to complain like, all right, yeah, it's getting dark and my, you know, flashlight decides to do this on me. Take the video, pull the batteries out, put them back in, and the headlamp starts working normal. I'm like, all right, cool. I finally find the perfect spot to put the hammock up, and I realize how bad the mosquitoes are. Like, I don't know if I was in some type of daze before and didn't notice them, or just kind of panicking, like, because of the time crunch, like I got to get set up before dark, or what. So I packed the hammock back in. The headlamp works normal, you know, to get me down the mountain in the dark. I go back to where I was camped, reset up, get the fire going. Nothing, you know, happens. The next day I showed the video to a few people and like, yeah, that is weird. And I had the headlamp with me. I'm like, here, try it. Like, try to bump it on, stuff like that. No, that's weird. So, you know, even though the book's done, I still send Nomar, you know, a little report every time something weird happens. And I sent him the video. Maybe he can tell you what happened from there.
Yeah, so he sent me the video with that explanation that it does not have a strobe function. There was another video that he included that had him clicking through the different functions, and there was like a red light, a brighter light, and then some fourth function, I don't remember, but there was no strobe function. So I'm watching the video with the strobe function, and it just seems to me that it looked like Morse code, the way it was blinking. I'm like, that's kind of weird. I wonder what that means. So I Googled, you know, a Morse code sheet, and I can't remember if it was like 3 short and 3 long, something like that. But whatever the code was, it spelled out it gave us 2 letters, and the letters were M and S. And that's for Mike Stevens, if you know.
Yeah, I just got it. No.
Yeah, if you ask me, but it gave us both goosebumps, and we're just talking via Facebook Messenger, and like it's like 9-10 o'clock at night, something like that, and I'm like, oh my god, like I can't believe this. And I think I downloaded the little JPEG of the Morse code sheet and I sent it over to Mike so he could see the M and the S. But it was fascinating. And I also love, you know, staying in contact with people that I write about. You know, this is my 3rd UFO book. I've done 2 documentaries, and I'm still in contact with a lot of the witnesses that are like, here's this video, here's this quick story of something that is continuing to happen to me. So I definitely like having this open dialogue with witnesses. You know, I've had my own encounters. But I also like being an advocate or giving a voice to these stories. And honestly, I think it's a matter of historical record. I also think it's important for other people who can't feel like they can come forward to have something to relate to that's really helpful with the mental health. And Mike and I are all about, you know, helping people get through stuff. But there's so many we can't help because they won't come forward. So reading something like this, we hope can help people relate or maybe not feel so alone, you know?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole point of the channels, just to find people and get them on. But it's hard because, again, you tend to show your face out to the public.
Absolutely.
So it's difficult for some, you know, and it's traumatic for some, but it's healing to others as well. But
yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I've had to have some discussions with some witnesses is like, hey, there are going to be trolls, there are going to be people that leave terrible reviews, and they might even single out your story. Or in Mike's case, or the documentary's case, it's like single people story, and you might get ridiculed a little bit, like that's part of it.
Yeah.
And you just got to let it roll off your back, you know. But to Mike's and I's surprise, so far anyways, I mean, the book's only been out for less than a month, but everything that we've heard for feedback has been phenomenal. You know, I know I'm no Shakespeare by any means. I write how I talk, in my opinion, but I think that might lend itself to just readability, you know. And we're both kind of waiting for that other shoe to drop, you know, for that really scathing review, and we know it's going to come, and we just gotta take it. But this has been the most personally invested project I've ever done. Like, I'm always personally invested in all of them. I mean, it takes my time and my money and my resources to travel to these places and research these things, and talking to people, and you know, sharing some intimacies with some of these witnesses, and hearing about trauma, and explaining some of the things that I've gone through. So there's an intimacy exchange there. So there is you know, personal involvement in all of them. But with this book in particular, I don't know what the hell happened, but Mike and I really have this, I don't know,
Yeah.
strange bond or something.
Yeah, Nomar's not just the author of this book. He really does become a character in it. And, you know, I think when we sat down and originally planned to do this, it was going to be the atypical UFO book. He's going to write down the stories, maybe make a comment like, oh, this sounds like this case, that or that. You know, and that's fine. Like, that's interesting. Everybody wants to hear, you know, just the stories. But at some point, like, we made this bond and this emotional investment to the project, and it made this like left turn without us knowing. And yeah, it's my stories and my experiences that keep the pages turning, but it becomes less about you know, UFOs and extraterrestrials, and more about the human toll it takes on the experiencer, and living through it, and you know, how you're coping with that and still getting through the mundane life stuff. And you know, so we took it that direction. We wrote it, and we're like, we hope people get it. We hope it, you know, they read it that way and it affects them. And the feedback's been incredible. People are you know, what we meant to do with the book, we achieved. So
Yeah, and we were worried about it when the book was finished and it was where we wanted it to be. It then comes time for the business side of it, which is not my favorite part. I'm a creator first. And but inevitably, if you're trying to be a creator as a lifestyle, as what you want to do in life full time, there is a business side that you have to deal with. So that came submitting the manuscript to publishers. And in my contract with my previous publisher, for the next 5 years from when I signed that contract, they have what's called first right of refusal. So no matter what I write, I have to send it to them first to see if they're interested in putting it out. And so of course I was interested in having them put it out. You know, they did a great job last time. Sent them the manuscript. They enjoyed it, and they said, yes, we would like to put it out. And then what a publisher does is they send out what's called a contract memo. This isn't the big contract with all the legalese in it. It's just a financial short form that tells you what you're going to get paid for royalties and what controls you have and what controls the publishers have. So come to find out with that contract memo is that the publisher had all the controls, I had none, and the money was the same amount of money that I was paid 3 years ago on a contract. And in my head, logic followed like, hey, it's been 3 years. That book actually didn't do too bad. It was on some Amazon top 10 lists. And, so I was hoping for, a little bit more. I am a creator, but I'm also need to, a place to live and food to eat and stuff, so I was trying to do something a little bit more fair. They're great people, but they were unwilling to negotiate. So that's, I didn't like that. And the part I really didn't like is that we didn't have control over the cover over the title, the subtitle, and they also do some edits to the the meat of the book as well. But that's to come with any editor, and I wasn't so much worried about that part. But we did want total control over the cover, title, and subtitle, and they would not budge on it. So I had this difficult conversation with myself in my head, and then I messaged Mike, and I'm like, "Hey, here's the deal, and here's what I feel. I want to walk away from the publisher and do this ourselves. Now, I'm under contract, so if I walk away, we might not be able to put this out for like 2 years because my contract still had 2 years on it." And he was like, "Listen, man, I support you, and I support whatever you want to do with this. So if you need to walk away, walk away. It's got to be right for you as much as it has to be right for me." So I really respected that. I let the publisher know that I was going to pass. Some negotiations took place, but it didn't work out. And again, really lovely people, like, don't get me wrong, but it then came time to ask the publisher, since I passed, you didn't pass, but I passed, can I, even though I'm under contract, can I still put this book out independently, or can I shop it to other publishers? And they were amazing, and they said, yes, take that manuscript and do what you want with it. And it was a blessing. And I gave the good news to Mike, and that's when we hit the ground running. And since we had total control at this point, it was all about like trying to organize all that business side of it. And now I'm solely in charge of it. Instead of having a publicist and a publisher and distribution, I lost all of that, and I had to become all of it. I did have some contacts from working with the publisher previously and for my documentary, so that part has been kind of smooth, not 100% smooth. And distribution obviously isn't as good as, with a publisher. It's not in every bookstore, but it is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Actually, we have a local record store that's a chain record store in Maine. There's some in New Hampshire and Massachusetts as well. It's called Bull Moose Records. And they sell vinyl and CDs and tapes, but they also sell books. And I have some friends in Southern Maine who are friends with the owners, and they convinced them to buy some copies off of Amazon to sell in their store. And I just love the grassroots effort of this book. It's also for sale at another local bookshop in Southern Maine. So even though it's on Amazon and it's on Kindle, you can get it from my store and through some grassroots efforts. And I just think all of that is just a perfect bow on top of this grassroots effort of a book through Mike's and I's conversations and just how everything organically grew from it.
I mean, even our editor, I've known her for like a decade now, worked hand in hand on different paranormal stuff. She worked at the center where I met Nomar and stuff, and we had a good repertoire of just understanding each other people. And she's heard the story over the years, and she knew my story, so she knew what it meant to me. She knew all the the pieces, and she became our editor. She's an author herself, and so we didn't have to worry about somebody like gonna hack the story apart, hack Nomar's contributions out of it, because she already got that stuff. And like everything just, from stepping away from the publisher, to just kind of jumping off a cliff going, we'll see what happens. It seemed like it was guided by an unseen hand, and all just worked out better than we could have imagined.
Yeah, we're really lucky. And just to shout out the editor, that's Valerie LaFaso. She's amazing. She's a writer too. She's got some works up on Amazon. But yeah, just the whole entire process. Honestly, it was life-changing. I have my own mental health issues and concerns that I deal with. I suffer from anxiety and depression, and I go through waves of, all right, this might be the day I end it, to maybe a couple of hours later being like, oh man, I'm so happy I'm watching The Matrix right now. Yeah. Which that's how mental health works. And or that's how like anxiety and depression works for some people. You're fine and whatever. but a really big side piece to this whole story, or I guess something that grew out of Mike's and I's conversation, is the normalizing of the discussion of mental health and how so many people have mental health issues, some mild, some huge, and some people don't survive them. And currently, the best I can say is currently, Mike and I are currently surviving. You know, we do have hope, you know, a hopeful outlook, you know, but that doesn't mean that other stuff doesn't creep in from time to time or often, you know, and it's just really important for the both of us, the normalization of that discussion, you know, of mental health. It happens to everybody. It's not as taboo as it used to be, much like the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrials. It's not as taboo as it used to be. And it's just crazy how it works hand in hand together with this, with Mike's story in this book, you know?
Yeah, well, bravo that, you know, you two have really put a lot of effort into this. And I think
Thanks, man.
the importance of getting Mike's story out is important, especially in whatever format you choose.
Sure.
Because we all know a lot of people that, you know, went into a bookstore, happened to see out of the blue, remember Communion, Whitley Strieber's book? And they picked it up, and how many experiences jolted their memory just seeing the gray and reading it, then realizing, oh my God, this is happening to somebody else too. So again, you know, somebody might happen to fall on Mike's book, start reading it, and then, oh my God, this happened to me. So it's really healing to get, you know, people's story out there.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, and I'm glad you brought the parallel to Whitley's book, because we fashioned like the layout and design of the book to like the old UFO books of the 70s and 80s. It's a smaller format. You know, the typical format these days are like 6x9 type of books. This is an 8x5 book, and there's like a picture section in the middle, just like the old school books. And we wanted an attention-grabbing cover. And since this isn't the typical UFO narrative type of book, what other iconic piece could we use but still be eye-catching? And that's the Old Man of the Mountain of New Hampshire. It has since crumbled. It actually crumbled in 2003, but it's such a piece of Americana that it is recognizable, even if you don't instantly know the name. But to see the title and the subtitle associated with the Old Man of the Mountain, in my opinion, draws some intrigue. And like you said, somebody might pick it up, and lo and behold, now they're relating. They're not feeling so alone. They're feeling better, or you know, at the very least, they don't feel alone.
Well, and even the fact that the old man crumbled, but it's still here, like in New Hampshire, it's everywhere still. It'll always be a part of it. You know, it tied into the story, like I crumble, but you know, we're still here, we're still fighting, we're still trying to help somebody else. And
yeah, that's a perfect analogy. And the artist that did the cover is Mark Randall. He's done a lot of book covers. He's an amazing artist.
So yeah, so we've been at it for almost 2 hours. Do you guys want to?
Jeez.
Yeah, I know. You know, time flies, man.
Yeah.
So we could always wrap it up tonight. So
yeah, I'm sick of talking to you guys.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Yeah, thanks for coming on, Nomar and Mike. It's really good to see you. I couldn't come down to the gathering because of, you know, the COVID blockage, but
yeah,
but we'll see each other pretty soon. So
definitely.
Yeah. So those who want to learn more about you know, the book that just came out, the link's going to be into this description. And thanks again for both of you coming on. To those watching, big thanks. More experiencer interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.